We're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very warm evening meeting of the Mahone Bay Town Council. All of our councilors are present, as well as the senior staff for this meeting. Welcome to the people at home who have joined us via YouTube. And when this meeting concludes, before we go in camera, those of you who may be watching from home will have an opportunity to ask questions about any issue that is discussed this evening. So with that, we will acknowledge that we are gathered today at Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today we gather with the intent, followed by the living peace and friendship treaties with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. And we are thankful for that. Council, you have an agenda. The meeting is called to order. What is your wish with the agenda? Councillor Feeney?
Mayor, I'd move that we approve the agenda as submitted.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
I have just a slight request to amend and add, in terms of the correspondence, add Lara's communication to us, if it's okay with the rest of council.
Clerk, that's the document that you referred to during the, okay?
Your worship, yes, that's the document I referred to. That was an email that also included some other information. Ms. Kerrigan's comments about the wildlife feeding bylaw were just read into the public hearing, but she did have other environmental concerns that she raised in that email. And that was circulated to all of council.
Okay, thank you. So we will amend the agenda to include that in our correspondence piece.
Yeah, 4.3.
Okay, that's the deputy mayor's. Okay, so Councillor Feeney.
Yes, Mayor, that's acceptable.
As amended?
Yes.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Okay, moved and seconded as amended. Councillor Burdick, you have a question?
I just wanted, I did have a question because I believe the deputy mayor just asked for it to be under action items 4.3. So I'm not sure which section we're adding it to.
So that's part of his amendment, is to put it in 4.3. Okay. You've heard the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. Let's go to the minutes of the regular meeting of May 27th. What is your wish? Councillor Nell.
I would move that we accept the minutes of the regular meeting of May 27th, 2021.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Feeney, on the motion. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the minutes of the special meeting on June 3rd, 2021. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
I move that we accept the minutes as circulated.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Burdick, moved and seconded, accept as presented on item 2.2. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. We do not have any presentations this evening. Let's go to correspondence. The action items number 4.1 is a question from Verian Hasten on council policy questions. CIO?
Well, I mean, in terms of questions on the policy, I can speak to it from the perspective of the policy. The policy doesn't really have any of what Mr. Haysom has put down here in mind. The council added the requirement last year, Maureen, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 2 years ago, to have a signature on correspondence. It was intended to help council to understand from where the correspondence was coming. We, at the staff level, when we get a piece of correspondence, if it is anonymous, we do go back and attempt to get, a signature, a name to put to the correspondence. It's not in an effort to establish standing, so I can't really speak to that. I mean, we have no procedure around the establishment of standing, as referenced in the letter. So, staff wouldn't have questioned the signature here. I don't think that there was ever any question that this would appear on the agenda. The piece of correspondence that originally came in that's being referenced by this piece of correspondence. So as far as that goes, I do believe that the policy as it's written really isn't obstructing anyone's ability to write in, make their voices heard. I think it's just for clarity for council and for anybody reviewing the council package documentation or watching along at home to understand where the correspondence originated. So yeah, as far as that goes, that's it's my evaluation of the questions that were being asked. As far as whether council feels that there's a need to review the council policy, I do want to note that the comment about the title of the application form, I think that is correct. We revised the application form, we revised the policy to say presentation rather than delegations, and the application form being a separate document on the website. I don't think it was updated at that time. I don't believe it would require any amendment of the policy for staff to correct the application form. So we'll certainly take care of that. So I wouldn't recommend that council review or amend the policy on the basis of this letter, but obviously I'm not the arbiter of that. So yeah, and I'm available to answer any questions about the policy or otherwise.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Carver.
I don't think that there needs to be an amendment to the policy, but I would like to make a motion, if it makes sense, that staff do make the correction as suggested on the website, and also that in future, when a document comes in by email with an attachment, that both the email and the attachment appear on the agenda. That happens sometimes, but it didn't happen in this particular case. So in fact, what happened was that the attachment appeared on the correspondence section without the email that clearly identified the sender. So I don't know if that requires a motion or not, but I'll put it out there.
I wouldn't think so. Clerk, is that something that, or CAO, that we can accommodate, or?
As it's phrased in this case, I would say it would require a motion, and I would recommend against it. I understand that sometimes when people write in an email, they would intend that to be shared, and they typically specify that that's the case. But that would not always be the case. So to have a motion of council directing staff to in all cases attach the covering email, I don't believe that really would solve a problem. I think it would create a problem. So I wouldn't recommend it. In the future, if there's a situation where an entity that is known to the town, like this one, has written in, and the covering email would provide some clarity, that would be an option. But I think we also have other ways to identify the sender. So
Okay.
I think it slipped through in this case unintentionally. I don't think a motion would be required to address it going forward.
Well, I certainly take your advice on that. It's simply trying to find a way to ensure clarity in the future.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So, mine is just a comment to basically say, I think from my perspective, there was no anonymity of who had sent this in. I think we all knew who had. I think Councillor Wilson at that point shared opinions. Because we did not react to it doesn't mean we endorse them. We don't have to react to each and every comment that councillors did. And I think we individually figured out what the best way to handle that correspondence was, which I think council did, and we gave a good decision to move it to a place where we can have very good conversations. So I don't feel that we necessarily need to change policy for what occurred then. So if sometimes I can air an opinion that you all don't agree with, you do not have to formally say, well, I don't agree with that. If you can see the decision is moving to a direction where we can all find a place to have a conversation about. So I think as feedback to Mr. Haysom, it's just to say, because we did not, maybe forgiveness from my part, but for not saying that we know who had submitted those comments. I think we knew because we'd received it alongside an email. It doesn't mean that we agree with every comment that was made during that debate when we were debating the issue. Those are the comments I wanted to make.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick?
Yes, thank you. If there is no requirement to have people sign their names to a letter where we know the entity as such, then I think we're sort of status quo here. But I do want to either do that here or in a letter respond to Mr. Haysom to say that we even though it didn't, all of the different motions attached to the proposal didn't go through, it has been directed to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting that is coming up soon. It's coming up later this month. So it is being considered seriously. It has been received and is considered seriously. So.
CAO.
Clerk will have to correct me, but I believe we sent a letter to that household with that information. I think it was to Valerie, but.
I'd have to double check on that. We've had a lot of council meetings back to back. I don't think all the correspondence is caught up yet.
Well,
If that one hasn't gone out yet, it will.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what I meant to say is staff were directed at the most recent meeting of council that what we're referring to send out correspondence with that information. I'm sorry, Mo, I didn't mean to put you on the spot to say it had already been received. If they're watching, it's on its way at some point. But I just meant to say that I believe to Councillor Burdick that we have done that unless sending a separate letter to Varian is necessary. I can't imagine.
Clerk, what does the current policy require of the sender when they submit a comment, a paper, an email, whatever, to council in order for it to be considered?
Policy requires that the place of residence is stated. So when we receive any form of correspondence, we have some people that are aware of that and will automatically put their address on it. If it does not have that, we contact the sender and we say, for this to be added to the agenda, the policy states blah, 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 but that the place of residence must be noted. Okay. And I will say that I did not require that of Talking Trees because we know that it's an entity, not it's an entity that's familiar with the town, not a person that we deal with. So I didn't ask them for an address because they don't have an address, but we do know where it came from.
Okay. All right. So, Councillor Carver, your motion. I don't know if we had a seconder for it.
No, I think I indicated that I was happy with the CAO's comments about that, and that action would be, remedial action would be taken on those points, and didn't require a motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go to 4.2.
Excuse me, Your Worship, may I just clarify? So there's no motion at all then, Councillor Carver? You're withdrawing everything?
She's content
perfect.
with the, Deputy Mayor?
I was just showing you that the clerk had her hand up.
Okay, thank you. Next item is Katie Ayup. Concerns for our beautiful town and its abundant wildlife. I'm not sure what, Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I'd move that we receive and file Ms. Ayoub's information. And I think Councilor Burdick has already provided some information tonight about our next steps, which is reviewing trees and the urban canopy at our next strategy and planning meeting in July.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have a seconder on the motion? Councillor Now. It has been moved and seconded that the document 4.2, the concern for beautiful town and its abundant wildlife, be received and filed in as much as the issue is to be discussed at the next policy and strategy committee meeting, as Councillor Burdick reminded us. Councillor Carver, then the deputy mayor.
I can't support the motion as it stands because I would like to see this letter receive a response to the effect that it will be forwarded to that discussion at the Policy and Strategy Committee.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Is that a friendly amendment?
That could be a friendly amendment if.
Well, you know, I mean, I think we'll all agree that we probably need to clean up the correspondence section of the agenda. I'm not sure what the rationale is between deciding between what correspondence are deemed action items and what are deemed information items, or what the criteria for such are. I think we've had this conversation on numerous occasions in the last 2 months where the CAO has made it clear that every piece of correspondence is responded to, and the senders and writers are communicated with by staff. Council receives a large volume of emails and correspondence, many of which makes it onto the council agenda, many of which, including 3 or 4 emails today, don't, but they're all responded to in due course. This item is also being responded to. If our status quo response to every item that is on the correspondence action items is to require a motion of council to send a written confirmation back, then we ought to just make that a policy decision and take some counsel from the CAO. But I thought we were of the opinion that wasn't going to be our course of action. And we were not going to require a motion of council to direct staff to respond to every piece of correspondence, as that was something that they were already doing in the normal course of business.
Thank you.
So,
Deputy Mayor.
So my understanding was,
Burdick.
Councillor Carver was basically asking that we action this and refer it to policy and planning, if I understand that, and then that can be something she's supportive of. But I guess I'll move on to my comment and that we can figure that out. Or do you want to respond to that first? Councillor Finney, do you want me to move on? Or?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm happy to accept the friendly amendment.
Yeah.
And to respond to Ms. Ayoub's letter and informing her of council's approach to having a more fulsome discussion around the tree issue. Like, absolutely, that's certainly no hill to die on. I think that we have a cadence in the meetings where certain items are requiring correspondence back, and I'm not sure what the criteria is. So I'm not speaking specifically to this friendly amendment, which I'm happy to move forward, and we can move on to the rest of the agenda. I just think we do collectively need to have a little more of a pattern of consistency so that we can get through this element of the lengthy meetings with a little more alacrity.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burdick and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in this particular situation, because it's a topic that we are discussing in a few weeks, it is really a good amendment to have the writer and all the signatories, because there's over 80 of them, I believe, know that this is going to be on our upcoming agenda. I can see why not everything would need, but actually I do feel like with most action items for correspondence, either we decide to make a motion from it or not anyway. So that's, I fully support that amendment in that situation.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I just wanted to underline Councillor Feeney's comments about cleaning up this section, because there's a case in point right here. And the difference between 4.2 and 5.4 is negligible to my mind, and one's in action items and one isn't. And
Right.
And it's just, I think action items should be actually doing something, not just writing a letter or referring it somewhere else. It should be something concrete, and most of this stuff is simply correspondence for information.
CAO. And then Councillor Carver.
I don't know if we need to wait on the next plan review of this policy for other reasons. I know we've talked about reviewing it for other reasons a year in, but if council's inclined to do anything about this in the short term, the section on correspondence in the town council policy is actually quite brief, and it really only makes the stipulation to divide between informational items and items that are requesting action. Essentially, to the example of the one that was considered to be for information here, it just doesn't have a question mark at the end of it. It doesn't have an ad. It says, we hope the council will take this into account. So, it is for information. The real intention of a section like information, though, is for things like the UNSM briefs, for that stuff that comes to all municipalities that is just put out there for information. So council can try to nuance how you determine what is an action. That's very difficult for staff to do, obviously. Alternatively, you can just remove the division between the two things and have all of the correspondence titled correspondence, or you can do it based on who it's from. So you can say, we'll keep the division the way it is, but anytime we get a letter from a resident, we'll be putting that under action regardless. So there are a couple of options. It's just a question of, how does council want to approach revising it? Do you want to wait a year until you're already slated to be reviewing this at your committee? Or do you somebody want to pick one of these and make a request for staff to bring it back with said amendment? Because I agree, we should do something. We should do something about it, so we stop having this discussion at every meeting.
All right, Councillor Carver, and then Councillor Feeney.
Yes, and so we're still talking on the motion and the friendly amendment, and I believe that Councillor Feeney has agreed to a friendly amendment. Well, which is, I think it's a little more than a friendly amendment. It's really a change from a motion to receive and file to a motion to draft a response to the writer, informing of how council has directed the letter to be handled. So I do feel that however we decide to handle a correspondence, that it, as a courtesy, if where there's been a motion for direction about how a letter is to be handled, that it should always receive a response explaining what that direction was and how the letter was directed. I believe that as a council, we would want that to be happening.
Okay. Councillor Feeney, then CAO.
I'm fine, Mayor.
Okay. CAO, then Deputy Mayor.
Oh, I was just going to note, Councillor Carver, when you recapped what you thought of as the friendly amendment, I think I was on a different page. I thought it was to refer this letter to the upcoming meeting of Policy and Strategy Committee and to let the writer know that. If
that was going to happen. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, this is really Joe's motion, so it would have to be Joe saying it was correct as well.
And Councillor Now is the seconder. He'd have to agree with that friendly amendment as well, I might add.
Sorry, Mayor.
Deputy Mayor, please.
I sort of feel like I'm interrupting Joe's direction in this, but I just wanted to add to the conversation that as part of the referral there, one of the things I probably would want to urge council to do is maybe for that strategy, policy and strategy meeting, that we think about inviting Talking Trees or a representative of Talking Trees, because I think so. One of the issues that's concerning for me around the issue of trees and generally where we are heading is a negativity that's not helping us all in the sense that, yes, I think we're all concerned about trees, but we also need some development, and the way in which we respond to things is not very helpful. So as we refer this and we're very receptive to comments from folks, I think it might be a very good place for us to have a conversation as to how do we, whatever decisions we'll make, and however the community wants us to move with a tree issue, there's a piece around how is Mahombe portrayed on social media and in communication. We don't need to be having the tag and pull, and so I would advise that council invite Talking Trees to our next policy and strategy alongside this. So maybe if that can be either another motion or part of the motion.
Well, we got to deal with this motion first, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay, the motion that's been moved and seconded with the friendly amendment is that we advise, in particular, the author of the missive, that council has referred the item to the Policy and Strategy Committee meeting next. Clerk, is that about it? Okay.
Yep.
You've heard the motion with the friendly amendment. On the question, all in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to item 4.3. Deputy Mayor, this was yours.
Before we close the other one, is it okay if I move a motion to invite Talking Trees to the next policy and strategy committee meeting?
You can move a motion if you choose to.
Yeah, if possible, I'd like to move a motion for us to invite representatives from Talking Trees to the next policy and strategy meeting. We'll be discussing the communications we've received along about trees.
Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, I certainly support the motion and happy to second it. I also wonder if it might even be more beneficial to invite interested parties if they choose to, come to council with a delegation. I'm not sure which format is most appropriate, whether the open, whether these presentations that I think we're seeking would be better provided in a public forum. So the difference between the how public the committee is versus how public the town council delegation process is. So I'm happy to support second the motion, and I guess we can the group can avail of that opportunity, or at any time, as we all know, they can come for any 10-minute slot at any council meeting. If they have something if they think there's an opportunity for any community member to come forward and avail themselves of the delegation process, or pardon me, the presentation process.
Okay.
So I cutting to the chase. I second the motion.
Okay. Is it something that might be referred to the land use bylaw committee process as opposed to this one? Would it be more useful to have it when we're having those discussions? CAO, then Councillor Carver, and then Councillor Wilson.
Well, I had my hand up before that last question, but I want to just respond to it anyway. I think they have made this submission to the land use bylaw process, and we know that there will be there will be a number of opportunities asking people to give submissions. So we could send this to Jason, as we send a lot of things to Jason, but the council wouldn't be. You wouldn't be referring it for discussion with council members as a part of that process, because that's a process led by a consultant. I guess I wanted to say you wouldn't be referring it to the steering committee in that case. and then I wanted to comment on Councillor Feeney's motion originally. Sorry, I thought I should try to get that in while I was here. Councillor Feeney, I wanted to say that I share some concern around whether that's the appropriate venue. Not only because it would not allow the public to watch the discussion, but also because by its nature, council established the Policy and Strategy Committee to provide council with an opportunity for reflection and discussion on items. And, you know, on receiving this and determining that council hadn't had an opportunity for reflection and discussion on the subject, referred it to the committee. So to have an initial discussion at that committee, you know, would seem to be best done with council, you know, following which time, if there's a request for, you know, council comes out with some questions, with some things they'd like to talk to the group about, you know, that are the result of that conversation, inviting them to, as a presentation to council, as you suggested, might be advisable. That's just a suggestion in terms of not having had that discussion yet.
Okay, thank you. So if, on CAO, you're suggesting it might be more appropriate to have the presentation by the Talking Trees group at a regular council meeting, where the public would be able to participate.
Meeting following council's discussion at the committee, which might result in them wanting to ask the group to come to discuss certain specific parts of the proposal.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
Yes, thank you. The CAO has taken the words right out of my mouth in terms, I had questions about the deputy mayor's suggestion of inviting Talking Trees to that particular forum, the Policy and Strategy Committee, because it wasn't clear to me sort of how that would be set up. And because that committee is so new, we haven't got a clear process, but I certainly had expected it to be a place where council would be considering issues and identifying questions and concerns, and then following up in whatever way seemed appropriate. So I wouldn't be supporting the motion at this point. I also just wanted to comment on your suggestion, Mayor, that the question of referring this, the letter and the content to the plan review process. In fact, that was one of the motions that was made at the last May 27th meeting and was defeated. Instead, the issue was referred to the Planning and Strategy Committee. So I would far prefer for the Planning and Strategy Committee to grapple with the issues and information and recommendations that have been put before us, and then to decide a way forward. And I certainly appreciate the Deputy Mayor's reference to minimizing negativity and confrontation and polarization around these very important issues.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Burdick. And then Councillor Now.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor Carver. I was just going to point out that motion was defeated at the last regular meeting. And I would suggest respectfully that we might want to discuss that extremely long, extremely detailed submission from Talking Trees. I think it was 12 pages long, as a group, a committee, before we get into further presentations. I think what was written was a very good outline of their position on the issue, and I'm not sure a presentation, which would essentially be a presentation of the written presentation, would shed much light on the subject.
Thank you. Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. Yes, that is both Councillor Carver and Councillor Wilson said what I was going to say, which was the submission is in place. It has been forwarded to the committee, and it is a substantial document to address. I think it's already there, and I think it's a good place to start or to continue. The question of, I guess, the passions involved on social media, there are ways of, I'm not entirely sure how those can be addressed exactly beyond reassuring people that this is very much a topic that is on our mind. We are also citizens of the town. We might have different viewpoints, which makes sense because we are, a cross section maybe of the town. But I do hope that as conversation continues and we reach out to people, that that maybe the language is calmed down a little bit, that there's more discussion of the fact that there are a multitude of things being talked about at the same time. But again, I'm not entirely sure how you modify that, except by saying we are talking about it. We want to talk to you about it. We are listening to you also.
Okay, Councillor Now, then the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, this is a big topic, and it's a very long-ranging topic. So I think we have a lot of different subjects, a lot of points of view to go over. So I think if we could get together as council to discuss that without involving talking trees at our next planning strategy committee, I think it'd be a whole lot better that we could get that over with. If we have to come back with talking trees at a later date, then so be it. But right now, I think with all that we have to discuss at that meeting, we've got enough on that plate without involving somebody else.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Fair enough. I hear you, and I will say, I guess, just to put out what my thoughts were. It wasn't about a presentation. I think what I would want to encourage is dialogue, and I think there needs to be dialogue on this issue, which at some point needs to be had. So one of the effects, for instance, of yesterday is potentially impacting people who have very good faith in the community, want to support the community in many different ways, to think about doing something different elsewhere. So that's what some of the things that I think a conversation might be able to stall. So I withdraw my motion, and maybe we can move on. But I would urge that we find a time quicker to have that conversation, because I think I brought it up during our strategic planning that we need to get ahead of the curve and have this conversation even before it gets to where it is right now. Yeah.
Thank you. So you have withdrawn your motion? Okay. Have we gotten to a seconder for that motion? Who was the seconder? Councillor Feeney, you have no issue with withdrawing it? Okay. Councillor Burdick, I think, is next.
Thank you. I did notice also in the staff report, which is coming up, the reminder that the trees bylaw review is going to be received or available to council September 1st. That is also something that's, all of these things are being considered and talked about, but that's also another aspect of this that is going to be impacted. Is my timeline correct, CAO and Deputy Clerk?
Oh, you put your hand up so fast. Did you want to answer this one before me?
Absolutely do. So where we are with the trees bylaw is that is going to be developed as we proceed with the Plan Mahone Bay project. So at this point, it's on the schedule for September, but depending on how this process goes, that could shift. So September is what the report says, not necessarily that there will be, that's what the report says tonight. Let's say that.
But I'll also elaborate just a little bit on the interconnection between the two things. So the idea of a trees bylaw is a bylaw to regulate trees on private property. Like that's what's been discussed. So the land use bylaw would typically say, in line with the, with the rest of this document, a separate bylaw could be developed, something along those lines. And that bylaw would be carrying out, but expanding upon intentions that are laid out in the municipal planning strategy. So as we go through the Plan Mahone Bay process and we gather feedback like the feedback we've been receiving quite a bit of it, that says that there's an importance to trees in the community, to protecting trees on private property in the community. that itself is what would inform council eventually adopting a land use bylaw that prescribes a trees bylaw, as an adjunct and enforceable piece of town policy. So it's in the fall, when we do consultations as a part of Plan Mahone Bay, we'll be gathering the input that would inform a trees bylaw that would be pursuant to a land use bylaw that would in itself direct us to develop or have the opportunity to develop a trees bylaw. I know that sounds like a lot of bureaucratic speak, but it's also a lot of opportunities to hear from the broader community about the specifics and impacts on these, big subjects, especially when it comes to private property issues.
Where did that come from, CAO? The notion that that's the intent of this process is to have a tree bylaw that impacts on privately owned property?
So when we go back to the origin of what a trees bylaw is,
I know what the group has been trying to get the tree bylaw.
No, I mean, when staff were directed to review the trees bylaw, it was, so we have a trees bylaw on the books presently.
That's right.
The intention of the trees bylaw that's on the books presently was a few fold. So there are certain things that the trees bylaw prescribed or set in place that are handled in other ways by the town today. But one aspect of it that is not otherwise the purview of the town and any of our other policies or bylaws has to do with the regulation of trees on private property in any capacity.
Okay.
Trees on private property. So what council would need to determine is, are we going to go through a process to develop a trees bylaw? And even that question is what staff are to come back and report on. So as a part of the land use bylaw process, we're hearing from people about trees, and staff will be able to comment on that and say, as a part of this process, council could say, our land use bylaw prescribes a trees bylaw, which will itself have to then have, I'm sure, a lot of public process to become developed. Council could also say that the spirit of the planning strategy can be carried out with the land use bylaw alone. And the land use bylaw does have regulations having to do with lot coverage and setbacks and screening and other things that do speak to vegetation and trees. So the toggle on and off of the additional piece of the trees bylaw is a part of the land use bylaw process. But the origin of it is with the current trees bylaw that is on the books currently.
So when we have those, I don't want to belabor the point, but when we have those discussions with the public, that it will be very clear to them which way we're toggling with the land use bylaw. What exactly it's going to mean for their own property and what their restrictions and or limitations are going to be. That will be made clear to them?
Yeah, well, it would be made clear to them in two ways. So the first time around, what is being clarified is it is considered within the spirit of this land use bylaw to regulate trees on private property in any way. And if the feeling at that point is no, and council doesn't prescribe a trees bylaw, then there wouldn't need to be further nuanced participation around in what way the trees on private property could be regulated. And then if council does feel that that there should be some form of regulation at that time based on that initial question that's put out for feedback, then there would have to be additional feedback on in what way we would be involved with the regulation of trees on private property. But as a matter of principle, it's a yes/no question in the first place. Should there be a trees bylaw regulating trees on private property, or should there not be one?
I think it's more a question of degree than yes/no. Councillor Carver?
Yes, I would think of it more in terms of a bylaw that may include some elements of regulating trees on private property. The may, I think, is very, very important. It's not either or, it's not black and white. It could be something as simple as, I can't think of a good example right now, but one of the ones that's come up is in a new development, a new build, for example, consideration be given to retaining a certain percentage of trees on a private lot.
Mhm.
I just want to avoid the idea that a tree bylaw will just willy-nilly give the town authority over what can be done on a private property, because that is exactly the kind of thing we're trying not to do or to avoid.
Okay. Councillor Wilson and then CAO again.
I was just going to suggest, Your Worship, that we might want to defer this wide-ranging discussion to the actual meeting on the 28th. It's
Good idea.
earmarked for that.
Yep. Good idea. Thank you for reminding me of that. CAO?
Yeah, in the spirit of that, I just wanted to address Councillor Carver's point, because it really honestly is not correct that we would have a bylaw that might regulate things. The land use bylaw does what you're describing. The land use bylaw has all kinds of regulations that could impact on trees. If the land use bylaw says we will also have a trees bylaw, the trees bylaw would be for the regulation of trees on private property. So the question of whether we have a trees bylaw is the significant first question to be answered. But I don't want, just from a staff perspective, I really think it should be understood that we wouldn't develop a trees bylaw if it was not going to do something that was not already being done through our other bylaw. So like we have a land use bylaw. So the intention of doing a trees bylaw would be to set up a new enforcement mechanism. Like, I understand this is a priority, but priority should be action, not just policies and bylaws for their own sake. So, I think it's important that we do be honest with this group and say, this is how these mechanisms could be used. This is how they will be used. The land use bylaw is a very powerful tool. It will have a lot to do with the future of trees in the community. So the trees bylaw is not the only piece of regulation governing trees. And what you described in terms of retention of trees in a new development is the sort of thing the land use bylaw governs. What a trees bylaw would fill in the gap for is regulation of trees that exist on properties that currently have them. Where you would just choose to cut down a tree on your own property, for example. And I think it's important that that be understood if we get to that point. I understand that no one wants to be hyperbolic, but I also don't think that we should be going down the route of trying to develop a bylaw without a clear understanding of what the intention would be. So we'll save it for the 28th.
Thank you. Okay. We're done. Let's move on. Correspondence, part 5. There are 4 items for information. Clerk, and then the deputy mayor.
Your worship, item 4.3 was added in the approval of the agenda. It's a correspondence from Lara Kerrigan.
Yeah. I thought it was being added as a matter of record because we had discussed it earlier, but Deputy Mayor, did you want to address it?
Yes, I did. I think there's some issues there that I raised in terms of our relationship with I guess, one of our largest taxpayers, and it deserves some, I guess, consideration. And I was wondering whether we can put that into the list of items that we discuss as policy and strategy. So I'd like to move a motion to refer it to policy and strategy.
Okay. The next meeting or the meeting after that?
I'm just moving it there, and then I think in terms of the list of things we have to cover, I think we have a few things before we can get to it, but at least I'm just following the process that we've established around putting things there.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick?
Yes, I'm happy to second the motion, but I think it should be clarified which which specifically that is, just for people watching, because they haven't read the letter.
Which agenda you mean, or what the things
What is
were?
being forwarded to the policy and strategy?
Okay, does somebody have that letter in front of them? Clerk?
I'm not sure if I can share my screen, but I think I can. Is that something that people would like me to do? Or Councillor, were you thinking more along the lines of just an overview of what it is?
Councillor Burdick?
Whatever simplest for you.
I need the host to let me share my screen. Just while I.
You should be
there-
able to.
She's on it. But you should all be seeing this. As was noted earlier, the first part of the email references the draft wildlife feeding bylaw, and those comments were read into the public hearing just prior to this council meeting. Following that, this is where you can see from here, comments regarding RPS.
I would suggest we refer the letter for discussion and potential action, rather than try and pick out now. I mean, there are some important issues in there. Councillor Burdick, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, so I did want to second the deputy mayor's motion to forward this to the committee. I just wanted it to be known what was being discussed.
Thank you. So we have a motion to refer the letter from Ms. Kerrigan to the Policy and Strategy Committee. CAO?
I know this is a long meeting on a hot night, but we're getting creative with the way that this committee is used. And I just wanted to call attention to the fact that we've referred other pieces of correspondence because they aligned with an item that council had already elected to put on the agenda. But this item being referred to the committee would essentially just create a two-tiered process for each item on the council agenda. So it's council's prerogative to do this. But I would suggest that you don't want to set a precedent of just referring items there that don't align with an upcoming piece of agenda for the committee the council may have already determined. I understand the intention for it in the other case, but.
Councillor Feeney.
So Mayor, I'm very concerned about what I think may be a breach of protocol. So we had a private piece of correspondence to council. It was brought into the public record because it had a similar theme at our public meeting. And then it was referred to this meeting, and now this private email is now a public document. And I think we've received dozens of private emails from citizens on a whole host of contexts and themes, several of which we've received today, that I don't believe our standard protocols that a simple email with a variety of information is going to make its way into the public domain. So, we're here now. We just flashed up this private email. It wasn't addressed as a submission to the feeding the wildlife. It wasn't addressed to say, here's my submission. It was just a private email to council. It's now been entered into the public domain twice. Now, maybe Ms. Kerrigan has no problem with that, but I do think I can see other situations where other citizens wouldn't appreciate having their private correspondence read into the public domain.
How can council deal with it if it's not placed in the public domain?
We receive information from private citizens on personal matters all the time, and we deal with it because we bring that private information to council, bring that knowledge of that private information to council, and we either deal with it in camera if it's deemed to be required to remain private, or we address it through policies, amendments, or legislation. But we don't just simply forward every piece of correspondence from private citizens and read it out in a public meeting. Now, maybe this wasn't a big deal for this particular piece of correspondence, but I think mistakes have been made this evening. And
Okay. Okay, clerk and then the deputy mayor.
Councillor Feeney's right. A mistake was made this evening, and it was 100% mine. When we received this correspondence from Miss Kerrigan, as is my policy, or sorry, I shouldn't use that term, as is my procedure, I followed up with Ms. Kerrigan and said that there were really two separate subjects in this. What would the best way be to proceed? And what was agreed to, and this is my mistake, which luckily the deputy mayor picked up on earlier, the comments about wildlife feeding bylaw were going to be read into the public hearing, but the full email was going to be added to this council agenda because really the bulk of this email did not have to do with the public hearing. So yes, there were several discussions back and forth with Ms. Kerrigan about this email. You're right, there were mistakes and they were all mine.
And did she realize that this was going to be discussed at council?
Yes. She knew that her comments specific to the wildlife feeding bylaw would be received at the public hearing. And she knew that the full email would be added to the agenda for this council meeting.
Okay, thank you. Deputy mayor.
And no need to add to that. I'm good.
Okay, sir, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion, I believe, to refer this document to planning and strategy. Moved and seconded. Lots of discussion on a hot June night. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. What about the 5.1 through 5.4 information correspondence? What is your wish? Councillor Now.
Yeah, I'd move that we receive and file the correspondence 5.1 to 5.4.
Seconder? No one seconds. Deputy Mayor seconds. And then Councillor Feeney and Councillor Wilson. But Deputy Mayor seconds it. You've heard the motion. Deputy Mayor, you wish to speak?
And I know we've talked about this, but did we agree on how we'll clean up where things land? I don't think we did, because some of these things refer to subjects that are above there, and I was sort of wondering. I'm still not very clear about why do they land in a different place. Have we resolved that?
Clerk?
No.
Sorry, my mouse went to sleep. We, as the CAO said earlier, certainly if there is something to be tidied up in policy, that's something we can come back to. And he had said at any point, council can make a recommendation and say, let's clean up just that specific part. But right now, when the decision is made about where something goes on the agenda, it becomes an action item if it has a question mark, if they're asking a question of council, or if they are saying if they request a specific action, or if they ask a question of council. That is not terribly scientific, but that's how we make that determination at this point.
CAO?
Just also
Thank
a
you,
little
Clerk.
note to say, just because something is for information doesn't mean that it's not relevant, and to receive and file doesn't mean to ignore. So I think we should take into account that sometimes, such as these ones, people have said, we have previously written to you with suggestions, and we feel that you should look at those suggestions all the more after an event or something has taken place. And that's it. They're just telling you that. So to acknowledge it, to receive it, that's all they're looking for in that sense. So I don't think it should be seen as a dismissal. It's to the individual members of council what you do with the information, but you've heard it. It's been presented. It's been added to the public record. And just to head off the question of what do we tell people, we tell them it was on the agenda tonight for information, and they can watch the meeting with everybody else.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion table to receive and file. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. So that gets us down to staff reports, and this is the first of the month report segue. Mr. CAO, anyone have any questions concerning the staff report?
Just note that the next one, we're going to have we're going to take a first crack at incorporating the newly adopted strategic plan and budget into the document. So will be a much longer document for you guys to take a look at next time, and let me know what you think about the format. We're going to try to tighten up the format for the strategic plan. Council's new strategic plan is more succinct, and I think we'll be able to have a pretty succinct reporting format for it. So look out for that next time.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
Thank you. I have a question about the council furniture, if that's appropriate.
It is on the agenda, the next item, Councillor Carver.
Oh, that's where it was. Okay,
6.2.
wrong item. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I'll have to admit I didn't have enough time to look at this, but I sort of missed. There was an item I think we talked about. I don't know whether it was last meeting or the other meeting around coming up with some proposals for traffic calming measures on Kinburn, and I didn't see it here, so I was sort of wondering whether it's still.
I'm just noticing this is an interesting problem, Maureen. I hope this doesn't affect the public package as well. Deputy Mayor, your issue may be coming from the fact that when you click on the link in your package, it is taking you to the prior staff report, and I'm not sure whether it's happening. It's going to May 27th instead of June 8th. So you guys can all take a look at the correct one. Mo will fix the link and send me your questions by email, I guess, because yeah, you're not looking at the correct version. And I'm sorry, I didn't click on it to check because obviously I knew what the report had in it and I wasn't looking to review it again myself until right now.
Thank you, CAO.
So no wonder there's no questions. You got them all out last time when you looked at this exact same document.
Comedy of errors. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for picking us up on that. But something tells me Councillor Burdick was aware of it as well, and she was waiting to bring it up. Okay. Can we talk about the item 6.2 while we see if we can get the right report up?
Yeah, well, the report I think you guys will just have to look at after the meeting because you won't be able to get much out of it. But we can skip to the next item.
Let's go to Council Chambers Furniture.
All right, so back in March, Kelly had put together a report on furniture and equipment for the new chambers. This represents a continuation of that, pretty much in line with what she had presented at the time. In terms of the equipment, we've been moving ahead with some of the equipment. She's gotten comparative information around the furniture. The request here is to authorize staff to proceed with the furniture as proposed there, which aligns with what she'd originally presented back in March. And I guess with the question for council about chairs, we didn't actually propose replacing the chairs. We do have chairs that were deemed to be in a usable condition. It could be used with this new table. However, we, in our quotes, we did everybody who supplies tables wanted to supply chairs. They think that you're going to want to get new chairs if you're getting a new table. So the budget set at 15 wouldn't be enough to accommodate the chairs. Wanted to present council with the recommendation that we go ahead with the tables purchase, and then also would like your direction with respect to the chairs.
Okay. So
some of you know the chairs well, and some of you don't. So I'm sorry you're not on equal footing about that.
Okay, Councillor Burdick.
Yes, I've never sat in those chairs. Is there anything substantially wrong with those chairs? Do they not fit around the new tables or?
They were found to be adequate and in reasonable condition, but you can ask the council members for their personal opinions about them. I don't know. I'm really not trying to push you guys to getting new chairs. I just don't want you to get in there and your first thought will be, why didn't we replace these chairs? So
They were better than the chairs we used to have. Right?
good way to put it.
They are rather large relative to the size of the desks that were there.
And they still will be a little bit large relative to the desk just because of the style of chairs that they are.
Makes them a
They're
little bit
classic,
awkward.
classic boardroom chairs with the high back.
Councillor Carver.
Yes, I was going to say that those chairs were very bulky and used up a great deal of space in a room that's not cavernous, shall we say. And they're not really ergonomically satisfactory in many ways. So I would support the idea of the new chairs, assuming that they will be an improvement in size and comfort.
There is a depiction there if you, just to make sure you had a chance to see them. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, they look nice. They look compact enough. But I do have a question about the table arrangement, if I may. When I look at the diagram of the sectional tables and the way the legs are configured, the diagram shows 3 seats down each side, but the middle seat has the unfortunate feature of straddling the table legs. So I don't want to be the person in that chair.
Very good.
Yeah, I see what you mean about the way the legs are angled there. I think if you have 3 people on a side, that may be a challenge. The individual table pieces, yeah.
I really think that's a serious problem.
Okay, Councillor Burdick.
Looking at the diagram, I just wonder if the chairs can be reoriented so that they fit into that sort of the empty space next to, and that way.
What you'd have to do is you'd have people go around the table an extra little bit, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. So, Councillor Carver, do you see what you mean? You'd have the 2 with their own tables in the middle, and then you'd have one on one of the side tables, the way it's configured on the other end.
I think the hitch is that in the diagram on the left side is where things like reporters or presenters or delegations would be sitting. So if council members are shifting around a bit, it decreases the space available for delegations.
Now that table can also be pulled out as well, the delegation table. So if there was somebody there, we could also just shift that table back a little bit from the rest of the tables.
Can we approach the supplier to see if they have any alternative suggestions that might?
Well, I think the alternative
problem?
I think Kelly looked through a lot of them. I think the alternative suggestion is an additional row of tables essentially. So you can have a configuration where there are 3 on each side instead of 2 on each side, and then each person would be tucked fully underneath the table. The challenge is that although the width of this table does fit well in the space that we've got, if you were to add another one, you'd essentially have no gallery space. You know, it would be a very long table. I think in terms of the length and the space around this table, when the thing is put together, it would be quite sufficient for the size of the group that we have. It's just the legs are the issue. So if we did add another table, I think it would be a very long table. It would completely fill the room.
$400,000 renovation, and we don't have a table that will accommodate council easily.
Well, to be fair, we've never had a table that would accommodate
No,
council
I agree.
easily.
Councillor Burdick.
I just muted myself. But so my question then is, if we're considering this, which it's another substantial amount of money there, if we would like auction off the other chairs, or is there anything that could mitigate the cost?
Clerk?
We can't auction off the chairs that we have because we got them free from the provincial government surplus. So we cannot accept money for
Make
something
money.
we got for free. Right.
Okay.
We can give them
Right.
to an even more needy organization, though.
Any other comments? Should you choose, there is a motion.
So, and if we do need a motion to direct staff to come back with an alternative for the table, we can do that to your next meeting. It just, I know that Kelly has looked into the available table options, and I think the number of legs on this one, relatively speaking, was actually quite low. Like it's.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I haven't had anything to do with this, of course, as I suspect many of us haven't, but I'm wondering if any consideration has been given to just buying a nice big boardroom table that we can all sit around, like we're at an actual meeting.
Back in March, when we presented on this subject, that was certainly one of the options that was included. And again, if staff are so directed, we could absolutely come back to your next meeting with an option for just a regular table. I would obviously have some limited functionality around what you could do with it, but hey, that's a table.
Well, I can, if you're worried about me, I can find another place for my candies.
Okay, Deputy Mayor.
I thought the issue was the modular layout is easy so that you can repurpose the space.
Lots flexibility.
Moving that way. When I look at this diagram, I think it probably looks as if we cannot be able to fit, but when I look at it, it's possible maybe to work with an arrangement that we will not have those legs, somebody sitting right at the middle there. It's possible to shift things around. So I'm comfortable with what we have right now. That's what I'm saying. If I end up being the one sitting sitting there, I'll accept it.
I'll sit on the middle bump seat as well. As they say in the
There
back
you
of the
go.
station wagon.
Two
So
volunteers. Thank you.
So I think the modular setup allows us to have maximum flexibility for the room. And again, we're only in the room 5-6 hours a month, 10 hours a month. Let's be charitable, but staff can utilize the room every day, or guests use it every day, which was a big part of the conversation on why we went with that design. So, I think I'm willing to take my chances that we'll figure out how to make it work given what we got used to back in the day. So I think it'll be a substantial upgrade versus what we've had in the past.
Okay. Would you consider making the motion that's provided?
Yes, I would, Mayor.
Thank
I
you.
don't have it in front of me, but I'd be happy to make that motion.
The council approve the purchase of new desks for council chambers as quoted. CAO?
And as you're going to make it, whatever you're going to make, Joe, you can say new desks and chairs, or you can just say new desks. So that's the choice that you get there.
New desks and chairs. And again, the context here is not a lack of frugality. It's just that the chairs that are there now take up a huge portion of the room. And to maximize the value of the room, I really think you have to have chairs that are size appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor? Second?
Second, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Carver?
I just want to say, I do think that the table leg issue is a serious problem. We do spend up to 4 hours at a time. And I think comfort is an issue. Surely it will help us be better counselors if we are not uncomfortable.
Okay, CAO?
This is what I get for trying to put a package together. I'm getting a message from the person who put this report together saying, and again, my apologies, we seem to be riddled with technical difficulties tonight, but the document that you're looking at in the package, the diagram of the table that you're looking at in the package is apparently not the final table configuration that was recommended. And I'm very sorry about this. I guess it's good we're talking things out so there's enough time for all the issues to come to light. Apparently there is a different updated configuration that I would love to share with you or have some way to share with you. I'm just hoping.
Trying to get it to you right now, Dylan. Give me a
I'm hoping if
second.
I talk into the darkness for a second, it'll show up.
It's coming.
So appreciating that there was a willingness to go ahead with this anyway, but I will share the drawing as soon as it comes through here. And hopefully it addresses the concern, and then we're all the happier.
See, we missed our chance to petulantly stamp our feet and say, we refuse to be uncomfortable.
Well, I do apologize for the, this is like a full moon or something tonight. I guess it's just the heat, but. All right.
Should have it any second, Dylan. It's coming to your email.
Yes, I think so.
I was wondering if a little discomfort might shorten up the meetings a bit.
Mm.
Well,
All
it's
my-
29 degrees in this room right now, so.
All my ice cubes are now melted, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
warm scotch, not the way to go.
Kelly
Okay,
points
here
out
we
that this
come.
was actually provided to address the concern that she noted, the same concern she noted it. She went back and said, no, we can't have that. And this is what they gave us. So it's actually smaller tables on the outside, I think, which is how you avoid having the legs where they would have been.
where they
Yeah.
are.
So then you've
Yes.
still got the ability to configure them together, but you also have the ability to have smaller tables set up. So more options.
And no one is straddling the legs of the table by the look
No
of
one
that.
is straddling the legs of the table. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And
Awesome.
you've got 24-inch space between each one, so hopefully good enough.
Okay,
And then these are small pieces, can be separated out, so you each have your own little individual piece with its own folding storage option in there, and for the candies, I think were mentioned. And then you also have the ability, if they're all separated for distancing, to separate each of the individual little ones. And that's kind of what we're used to, is a bunch of individual little desks. They'll be smaller than the ones you've had, but.
and for
Dylan, just
those
to
of you-
clarify, they're 32 inches wide, 24 inches deep.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
For those of you that like to rock, there's a rocking chair and there's a chair for two of you to curl up in. If we can go back to,
So
Good
with
friend of
clarity,
Giant.
hopefully, Joe, that won't change your motion.
Happy to
but-
proceed.
Councillor Carver, are you comfortable with that?
Ask if you shall receive.
There you go.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank
Heard
I
the
you.
should have known
motion.
that Kelly already had addressed that. I'm sorry.
the motion is to approve the acquisition of the tables and the chairs, moved and seconded. All in favor? That motion is carried. Good-o. Let's move on to the bandstand Phase 3 report. CAO?
So this one is following up on engagement activities that took place in March. There was a little bit of a delay on reporting as we were working through our budget process, but timely to have the report now because the funding opportunities exist now and we're in a position to look for some funding. So the report presents the conclusions of our engagement process and a recommendation to council to direct staff to apply for funding on a Phase 3 improvement of the bandstand. And I'll
Mhm.
take questions if there are any.
Questions? Councillor Burdick?
I didn't actually have any questions. It's a really good, thorough document, and I would like to make the motion, but if other people want to have questions.
No, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Wilson seconds. Moved and seconded. Now, are there any questions? Councillor Carver?
Yeah, I just want to raise again an item that came up in discussion at the Age Friendly Communities Committee, which was the idea of a circumferential bench in the bandstand that might serve informal use, as well as serving as a place to drop stuff when bands are using it or and so on. At any rate, I just hope that that particular idea doesn't get lost.
CAO?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I believe it has come up in discussion. One of the issues with that suggestion is in terms of possibly limiting the different configurations of the space for performances. So understand your suggestion, it might be between performances, it might be appreciated, but I think the reason it's not come up in the consultations, or it's been seen as potentially at odds with some of the other suggestions, is because we've been talking to the performers about how they want to configure it for their use, and sometimes that kind of built-in space could potentially get in the way. So I just wanted to note that as a concern.
Thank you. Councillor Feeney.
So, I think this is terrific, and certainly we'll be supporting the motion. I'm just curious, Dylan, about some of our other initiatives, such as the Edgewater beautification project or the Bayview Cemetery fence. Those other projects that we talked about in the capital program. I'm certainly comfortable proceeding with this as our priority item. So I'm just curious if you think there will be.
Not in competition.
Okay.
there will be others yet. I'm basically just having to respond to the grants as they're coming up. I honestly don't even know how I'm going to keep up with all of them. So the province has decided, Municipal Affairs has decided that it would be really convenient to make all of their grant deadlines the end of June. So
Okay.
what you're going to get is at your next council meeting, you're going to get a couple of recommendations around the beautification and streetscaping and provincial capital assistance program, and maybe the community works program, because they're all timed with the same date, as if small towns have multiple staff working on these
Of
applications.
course.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess that's good news. Potentially good news as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
there'll
thank
be
you.
more. I will say, I might as well now because it's a good occasion to bring it up. I did want to apologize. I missed the application window for the accessibility program. That's the provincial program that provides $10,000 a year for accessibility improvements to public spaces. The typical application window is in June, July from prior years, but it was actually very early this year and we missed it. So I have written to them to ask, do you have anything left over? But typically in the budget, we have a project for which we hope to access that program in any given year. So we may end up wanting to look at that for next year instead, but I'll come back to that one. But anyway, when I got this reminder about all the application deadlines, I was surprised to find out that one had been in April this year. So my apologies. It's only $10,000, but it's $10,000. So.
Thank you. Any other comments? There is a suggested motion in your package. If somebody would like to make it. Councillor Burdick.
Yes, I my suggestion a few minutes ago was to make it if I can read it out loud, and I think there was a seconder.
I think we're in discussion on it. Yeah,
We're in discussion on it now. Okay. So we have a motion. Council direct staff to apply to the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative and the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund to support Phase 3 improvements to the Michael O'Connor Memorial Bandstand. Who is the seconder? Councillor Wilson. I must have nodded off somewhere. Okay. You heard the motion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to report of the clerk. That's on the wildlife feeding bylaw discussion. Clerk?
Your worship, a public hearing was held at 6:30 this evening to receive verbal and written submissions regarding the town's proposed draft wildlife feeding bylaw. At that time, the information, council was provided the information on how and when the draft bylaw and the information about the public hearing were shared with the public. Submissions were received from John Bain, Christopher Gill, Varian Hasten, and Lloyd Westaver. Those submissions were emailed to council last evening, Monday the 7th. No further comments were received by town staff following those submissions. One comment was read into the record at the public hearing from Lara Kerrigan. There were no comments made directly to the hearing, and the public hearing closed at 6:51 p.m. Your worship, in the council agenda, there you will all see that you have the link to the draft bylaw for your consideration if council wants to do so at this time.
Okay, thank you. You've heard the report of the session. Deputy Mayor Kangata?
I mean, I'm just kicking off the conversation, but I think from reflecting on this and from the feedback we've received from citizens, I know that feeding sudden wildlife is a problem. The question that's still hanging in my mind is that a problem for Mahone Bay, and is it solving what people think it will solve? So as things stand right now, I don't feel I can support the bylaw. I don't, and as a priority, I don't think we have other priorities that you can focus on. So I just wanted to air that as we get into this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver.
I'm inclined to agree with the deputy mayor, and I certainly appreciate the well-developed and well-presented arguments that we have received from citizens. The questions of how big is the problem, enforceability, setting neighbors against neighbors, and one of the things that I had thought that a bylaw would facilitate would be to develop a really good education program. I mean, our staff have done so well with education campaigns, information campaigns, that this was another opportunity for such a campaign. And if we don't do second reading for this bylaw, in other words, if we don't support it, I'm curious to know what basis we have as town, as council, as staff to carry out an information campaign about appropriate relationships with wildlife in the town.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that we have to move forward with this at this time. I think there's been enough opposition to it. I don't see how we can enforce it. And the only thing we're really talking about in basics is the deer. And they're going to be here and they're going to feed on people's plants and everything, regardless of they're not going to worry about the bylaw. So they're going to be there. So I don't know if we need a motion to that effect, but if we do need a motion to the effect that we decline this bylaw, I would be so inclined to make it.
Okay, we have to have a motion to make the bylaw, Councillor Now. So, Councillor Burdick.
Thank you. I also agree that I think that it would be a really good idea to, if possible, have informational posts perhaps on social media or newsletters about feeding wildlife or not feeding wildlife. But I don't think it's a totally feasible bylaw right now. It did raise an interesting question for me as to, because one of the things that a lot of people brought up was enforcement or the perceived inability to enforce it. And it brings up the question with all bylaws to me a little bit, is like, I don't think that in itself is a good reason not to do it. I think there are other reasons not to do it, but I feel like enforcement is generally considered an issue with all bylaws, and part of the spirit of a bylaw is addressing sort of a social contract or a social idea that mainly people agree on doing without active enforcement of it. But I don't really see the purpose right now of this bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Clerk?
certainly not to step on Councillor Burdick's comments about the social contract of municipal bylaws, and that we refer to them as good neighbor bylaws. That's what we have in the town, as opposed to some of the larger rural municipalities, because we do all live in closer quarters in a town. So we have different sorts of bylaws because we have to think about being good neighbors. But I did want to point out that before this was even presented to council, we did have a discussion about bylaw enforcement, and there definitely, when we present a bylaw to council, we've discussed enforcement, and it is enforceable. So just to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carver and then Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to comment that Councillor Now had made about deer being the only perhaps problem. And I think ducks are a problem as they swarm Main Street. Literally, I mean, I think that's a real accidents waiting to happen there. And raccoons are being fed as well in town. However, I don't like the idea of feeding wildlife. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but I don't think that this is the time right now to introduce this bylaw. I think that we could do better with an information education campaign. My view at this point.
Okay, Councillor Wilson, then the Deputy Mayor.
Your wish, but I have no intention of trying to be more eloquent than some of the people that wrote to us about this topic. And I'm wondering, as we go forward, I'm not sure I understand why Councillor Now's motion to reject this bylaw is not in order. And if it is in order, I'd like to second it. And if it isn't in order, I'd like to move that we accept this bylaw and ask for a seconder with the view of voting against it.
Councillor, just before we leave that, Councillor Wilson, if no one makes the motion to approve the second reading of the bylaw, that's the end of it.
Okay, all right.
It stops.
I understand. Okay, good. Thank you.
Councillor Feeney,
So,
and then the Deputy Mayor. I think.
So
No, sorry, Councillor Feeney. Deputy Mayor's next. Then you, and then Councillor Carver.
Thank you. So on the issue of education, I think one of the things I would do sort of think about here is appealing to these folks in the community who have, I guess, expertise in this area. They have the ability to prepare packages that we can, I guess, partner with. That would be great. Just like I said, I think in terms of priorities and strategic priorities, I wouldn't want to task staff to, if we say it's not a huge problem for us, then let's not task staff with that. So my appeal would be to, if we have folks, and from what I've seen is that we have folks in the community who might be able to support us with this. As part of our strategic plan, we talked about partnering with folks in the community who might have skills and talents in other areas that we're not able to put energies in now. So maybe that might be something we might reach out and say that to the community, we need help with this. Are you able to jump on board rather than task staff to do a lot of that?
Okay. Councillor Feeney's next.
So, Mayor, as you know, I supported the development of the bylaw and appreciate staff taking the time to get us to this stage. I do think it was a good neighbor bylaw in the sense that there are citizens in the town that are being negatively impacted by their neighbors feeding wildlife. And it's not, and it's a significant issue to those particular people. I do think we're on the right track, however, and I think it's a recurring theme. We talked about it a little earlier on this evening around what I would say is public discord and the intensity of that public discord. And it's spilling into all kinds of unusual places, including this bylaw, this potential bylaw, and other potential bylaws down the road. So I think it is in our best interest to take the tack that's suggested this evening, to not move this along to first reading, and to to move it and to really try to provide some public education on the negative impact on certain neighbors by feeding wildlife. And I think the original intent was well intended, but at some point, I do think that the impact of the public discord overwhelms the underlying benefit of the bylaw, and I think this is an example of that. Okay,
Councillor Carver.
I agree with Councillor Feeney's comments entirely, and I have two questions, if I may. One is a procedural question. Am I right in understanding that you can't make a negative motion?
Oh.
The CAO has his hand up. Is he going to answer that question?
But it wouldn't normally be in order to make a motion saying that the bylaw not receive second reading. Like that type of a motion in the negative would not typically be in order. I'm not sure about something like that council, you make a motion that council does not adopt a wildlife feeding bylaw. But the traditional procedure, which I think the mayor alluded to, would just be to go to second reading and then to vote against it. I think that's been the traditional way to do it. And that owes to the idea, as the mayor has often mentioned, that you would typically speak in discussion to a motion that's on the floor. And in order to get the motion on the floor, second reading being that motion would already be on the floor, everyone would speak against it, and then the vote would happen anyway, and it would be in the negative. So that's more typical.
Okay.
Oops.
Councillor
And
Carver?
then that leads to my second question, which is if it does go to a vote and is defeated, what would it take to bring it back to the council table?
Yeah, the motion, the vote should be to defeat second reading, because we would have to redo a first reading in that instance.
But the issue of having a wildlife feeding bylaw could come back to council at some future date if we thought it was appropriate.
If there was significant new information.
Yeah, so the motion that's being defeated in this case, that would be a motion to be revisited, would be the motion to give second reading. So it wouldn't be in order for council to hear a council member say, I would like to have another vote on the vote to give second reading to that bylaw, because that had been considered and it had been defeated. If a council member were to make a motion to direct staff to develop a draft wildlife feeding bylaw, I mean, that would not be out of order. I would hope that council would take a moment to think about how many different wildlife feeding bylaws staff can conceivably draft, but it wouldn't be the same motion that had previously been introduced in that case. That would be the distinction. But I definitely think it's appropriate to defeat second reading while we have the opportunity, because it has gone through first reading at this time, and unless second reading's defeated, it leaves open the idea that it could go to second reading at your next meeting, because we never had a vote on it.
Well, if Councillor Wilson wants to go ahead with his motion, I'll second it.
So Councillor Wilson will make a motion to approve the second reading of the bylaw. Councillor Carver will second the motion, and then we will vote on it. Correct. And we're going to vote no, is what I'm understanding people for the most part to say. Right? Correct. The only point before we go to that, former Deputy Mayor Bain, who was a wildlife biologist, in his comments stated the deer and the raccoons have been here for a long time, and they are going to keep on feeding here, whether you give them a bylaw or not. So everybody's got to eat. Councillor Wilson, please.
So moved, Your Worship.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver moved and seconded that we approve second reading of the proposed bylaw. On the question, all in favor? Motion's denied. Thank you. Okay. That's the end of the staff reports. Let's go to Councillor Burdick, property taxes.
Yes, thank you. I know that there have been circumstantial changes since we talked about this before. However, well, first I'll present the motion and then we can discuss. My motion is that council direct staff to waive interest fees on overdue payments on past due commercial and or residential property taxes for the 2022 tax year to alleviate stress on small business from the impacts of COVID-19.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor? Thank you, sir. CAL.
So the motion doesn't have a time frame in it, and I just wanted to clarify the intention there. Would that be that interest not be charged on any accounts until the end of the fiscal, or would it be that the tax is charged this in this April and to come final billing in the fall will not have interest charges applied to them? Or is it like what we did last year for reference? We stayed interest charges on all accounts for a period of time, which essentially meant that, you know, within that window, if somebody came and paid their bill, there wouldn't be any interest charged. If it goes too long, I guess part of the reason I'm asking, if it goes too long, we start to get into a situation where people can become endangered of tax sale. You know, they're still that hasn't been avoided. Like they're not being charged interest, but they are still going to end up in a tax sale proceeding if they don't pay their bill. So I just wanted to clarify. I think a lot of communities have done an MODL being one, a suspension of interest payments to the end of August, for example. So I was just curious about if you wanted to put an end on that or what your thoughts were.
I would. My feeling is that to autumn would work in this situation. Part of my reasoning is that the impacts are ongoing for small businesses. There's a lot of catching up to do, essentially. We don't really know what the tourist season is going to be like exactly, obviously, as conditions change with COVID. Even if things get back to normal, there's a lot. It'll be a difficult thing. It'll be a difficult slog. So yeah, my suggestion would be end of August.
Okay.
Which is different from my motion, but that would be my modification.
Okay, so council directs staff to waive interest fees on overdue tax payments on past due commercial and or residential property taxes until the 31st of August or after the 31st of August. Is that what we're saying?
Until the end of August.
Okay.
And I will take, you know, obviously I want to hear everybody's thoughts on this. It could simply be property taxes for commercial enterprises. I'm not sure how we distinguish those in terms of doing this, or if that's what happened before.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, you were the seconder. Are you okay with the adjustment to the 31st of August date? Or
Yeah.
any, if it changes again? Okay, and you had a comment, I think.
Yeah, I just, from my sense, I think this is more sort of a show of support in terms of the tangible, I guess, material benefits to individual folks. I don't see it that much, so it's just a show of support. There could be other things that we could propose, so I don't see it as material, though I don't know how much it affects our coffers. I would hope not too much.
Councillor Feeney.
So Mayor, I'm open-minded about the motion. I feel more comfortable about deferring this vote until after we have received a staff report that itemized, you know, the tax bills, as we all know, were due last week. So I think it would be valuable for council to know exactly where we are as far as our receivables. And to what extent this decision, like what is the financial impact of this decision? Like, I think if we had those two data points, we would have we'd be able to have an informed decision about whether we could feel comfortable proceeding in supporting this motion.
Okay, CAO, can you comment on the financial impacts or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I can. I know that when we looked at this last year, a report was provided that looked at the financial impacts for deferring the taxes. And let me just see, council, here's Luke's notes from this year. Council receives approximately 12,000 in interest on past due residential and 8,000 in interest on past due commercial in a year. So we're looking at approximately $1,000 of interest revenue from residential and 650 of interest revenue from commercial. So as you noted, Councillor Feeney, we would have just started with that now. So we'd be talking about essentially losing, 3 months or up to 3 months of interest to this motion. So approximately 3,000, give or take. I mean, like, some people I'm sure will still pay their bills and will not accrue, would not have accrued interest. So it's a bit of conjecture.
But we must know now what the state of the receivables were as of the 31st of May.
Yeah, that I don't think I have handy here. We do know.
I think the intent of the motion is solid. And I think that's exactly what they're doing in the adjacent municipalities. So that, we're certainly not breaking new ground here. And we wouldn't want to, have a disadvantage here that other communities are providing their commercial tax base. But I just don't know how big a problem this is at all. I wouldn't expect that it's significant, given our history.
In terms of past due, like, we're in a relatively typical place in terms of past due at this time of year. I can say that. I don't have a stat that I can whip up, but it's not like we're noticing a trend in that area.
Okay. And
I'm not meaning to put pressure on anybody to not get a staff report. I'm just trying to provide the information on hand because I know it's timely.
Councillor Burdick.
Yes, thank you. As a few of you have mentioned, but specifically the deputy mayor, it is a symbolic gesture in some ways. A more substantial gesture, of course, would be waiving property taxes, period. And that, I think, is not feasible for us. But it is, symbols are important, and it will, even if it's not taken up by everybody, it's a gesture that shows we understand somewhat that it's been a difficult slog, and it will not also, if we're looking at the numbers, not be hugely detrimental for us, I think, financially.
Okay, thank you. If nothing else, it'll allow us to look the East Enders in the eye, hey? When the enemy bombed London and the East End in the war. Anyway, doesn't matter.
I got that reference, Mayor. It's okay. You're not all alone out in a limb there.
So we have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. Any further comment, Clerk?
Just like to clarify, if council would indulge me. My understanding of the motion at this point is that council directs staff to waive interest fees on overdue payments on past due commercial and/or residential property taxes until the end of August for the 2021-22 tax year to alleviate stress on small businesses from the impacts of COVID-19. Is that correct?
Given the reference to August 31st, we may remove the 2021-22. I would think. Councillor Burdick, you agree?
Yes, that was a modification. I think we agreed on till the end of August.
Okay.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, you're the seconder. You're okay. Councillor Feeney,
And just to clarify, you are now including residential as well?
I
Or
was
just
just
commercial?
Just gonna say and or needs to be clarified in a motion because that
Oh, yeah.
adds a little bit too much discretion to leave in the motion. So should it be and or should it be or? I mean, if it's or, just cross out the residential.
I do,
Not
if I may, I think for commercial specifically.
Commercial.
So it's
And-
just commercial?
Deputy Mayor, you're the
Deputy
seconder.
Mayor?
No, I would disagree and say both commercial and residential. We don't want to treat to be treating one group of taxpayers differently than the other. So I would say if you're showing that gesture, it should be to both.
Okay. Councillor Burdick.
I feel like I'm doing the shimmy over here, but what am I guess I didn't want to tax, sorry, the council too much in this conceptually. Sorry.
Well, if it doesn't
just
pass
happens
with,
sometimes. But yeah, ideally it would be for everybody if we're in agreement about that. I possibly Councillor Feedy has a good question there.
Well, I mean, so I think it started off as a response to a number of small business closings that we saw in the community over the last 60 days, knowing the cash flow for tourism related seasonal businesses, to address some cash flow items. But that's quite a departure when we're starting to talk about residential property tax driven by individual residential tax obligations. I mean, to me, those are completely different groups with very different impacts from COVID.
Okay, Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Burdick.
Yeah, so I know that's probably how it looks like, but those folks live in the same building, and you would have folks who are, for instance, if we still had Tummy to Mummy, who would be in that situation where we're closing our business, but we live in the same building, and if you treat those two operations differently, it's the same person, right? So the impact is on an individual. That's where I'm coming at this from. And if
this is specific to an owner-occupied commercial building where the owner also lived in the building. Is that just that group?
No, that's
No,
one situation.
I'm just saying if we're giving this, for me, which is a very token, I guess, symbolic gesture to commercial operations, let's do it for residential. Like from my perspective, I don't think it significantly impacts our coffers. So in a goodwill spirit, we're doing it. If we're very worried about the coffers, then let's not do it. Let's just move on to something else.
Councillor Burdick and then Councillor Carver.
Yes, I think that was, it's all coming back to me. When I was writing it, I should have been more specific and said, and I believe that is also consistent with what our neighboring municipal units have done also, is not had it only be commercial, but also be residential too. So yeah, that would be my reasoning there.
Okay, Councillor Carver.
Yes, if it's going to be commercial and residential, then I think there may be a clause at the very end of the motion that might be deleted because it refers to businesses having suffered impact of COVID, something along those lines. Do you follow?
Yeah,
It says to alleviate stress on small business from the impacts of COVID-19.
Right, so I would think that clause could be deleted if we're including commercial and residential to alleviate stress caused by COVID-19, period.
yeah. Councillor Burdick.
Yes, that was, I agree with that. At first I thought Councillor Carver was saying to delete that whole section, but the reason for it is because of the impact of COVID-19 on everybody, essentially.
Deputy Mayor, you okay with that? You're comfortable? Clerk, could you read us the motion now as it stands, please?
Okay. As of right now, it says
Wait
that
for it.
that council directs staff to waive interest fees on overdue payments on past due commercial and residential property taxes until the end of August to alleviate stress caused by the impact of COVID-19.
Okay, we're good with that? All right, you've heard the motion. The amended motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. What's next? Committee reports. You've got the committee reports. There's a couple of them. The Policy Strategy Committee and the Heritage Advisory Committee have got a couple of motions in them. And we'll go to that. Let's go, unless you have a question with the Asset Management Committee draft minutes, we'll go to the Policy and Strategy Committee. Thought there was a motion. There is a motion. It's a motion concerning the agenda. Deputy Mayor?
I'd like to move that that council set the agenda for the June 28th meeting of Policy and Strategy Committee to include the submission from Talking Trees, which was received at the May 27th regular meeting of council, and the draft local improvement bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Burdick? You've heard the motion. CAO.
I just want to make it clear here that these would be the only two items on the agenda. So even though council did refer some items to that committee agenda, that committee as the final item on its agenda would go through the same process that was done this time, considering those things, including the piece of correspondence that was referred to from tonight, and then would recommend back to council in your minutes a possible agenda for next month. And that agenda for next month could, but would not automatically include that piece of correspondence. So just trying to make it clear now that we've got different types of things coming to that committee agenda. This is the agenda. Only these items are the agenda.
All right. Okay, on the motion. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. The agenda is now struck for that meeting on the 28th of June. Let's go to the Heritage Advisory Committee. I think there would have been two motions in that one, was there? No, one.
At least one, Mayor.
Yeah.
Mayor, I'd move the council direct staff to give 30 days of notice to the homeowners of 342 Main Street, Mahone Bay, and that council intends to register their home as municipal heritage property, and that the hearing will take place on July 29th meeting of town council.
Okay. Councillor Burdick, second? Moved and seconded? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's see now. Registry 342, we just did that. I think that's all we have in the way of motions. Are there any questions on the Lunenburg County Senior Safety Program or the South Shore Housing Association minutes? Councillor Carver?
If I may, I'd just like to make a quick comment about the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day on June 15th, coming up soon. And,
I'm sorry, say that again.
The World Elder Abuse Awareness Day.
Okay.
Coming up June 15th, and all the senior safety programs around the province will be having a project involving face masks with that logo on it that they'll be distributing. And I also just want to say that the newly incorporated Lunenburg County Senior Safety Partnership Society will be having its first ever annual general meeting on June 23rd, to which you're all invited.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a role or is there activity that council can get involved with on the Elder Abuse Awareness Day?
not specifically, but if anybody, I'm sorry, I find myself speechless on that one. But it did remind me that in the statistics that the report listed of some of the housing precarity situations involve elder abuse so because people are living, different generations are living in homes. So that there are things like home takeovers and financial abuse. So the housing precariousness becomes a feature. So it's just a whole other aspect of affordable housing, for example.
Okay. Thank you. Well, maybe if there, I don't know, things for the town's website or things that we can share on social media, anything like that would be useful. Deputy Mayor, you had a comment? You're on mute, Francis. I can't take him off, can I?
Sorry, sorry about that. I was talking to myself. Just wanted to note that the minutes, the last minutes there are from the South Shore Housing Action Coalition and not association. Just for the record, as you.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. Shack. Okay. Alrighty. Let's go to. We have no new business. We do have a couple of items on a closed session. But before we go in camera, are there any citizens watching on YouTube?
Worship, we still have 17 people with us, and we do have 2 questions, but I believe it's one big question. So I'll read it as such. It's from the same person. I submitted my comments for the coming wildlife feeding to Dave's email on Monday. Did it not make it to council? Just questioning what happened to the submission I sent concerning the wildlife feeding proposal. I emailed it to the mayor on Monday as requested on his FB page about the issue. So I guess that's a question. There's a question in there.
Yeah, I don't know whose it is, but I do have any. I wouldn't have referred them to council on Monday because of the timelines. But they are on the Facebook page, so they're available to anyone who may choose to follow the page.
So just to follow up, I can say that I noticed today, for example, that you shared the one on the town about the public hearing, and I believe that's what you did before.
Yes.
But yeah, all of that information says to send it to clerk@townofmahombay.ca. So I think it's just a matter of information going to council or to public hearings, that it goes in a specific way so we can be sure we can have it.
And I think I said when I posted that they should contact Town Hall ASAP to get in your lineup for tonight.
Well, mine and the deputy mayor's. You have my back tonight.
Okay.
So that's the only question we have.
Thank you. And thank you to the citizens, not just the ones who may be still watching, but the ones who chose to send comments into council. Deputy Mayor Kangata.
Yeah, so just that made me curious as to when folks post on a question on YouTube, they don't provide a name, or do you expect them to provide a name? Because we don't know who that was.
It's not been my procedure to read it out, because often they're cute little names that, it goes with their account. But in fact, this one, it's a clear name. It's Christine Little. It's just, it hasn't been my procedure to read them because they're often cute names. But in this case, it is an identifiable person. Yes.
Because for me, it's linked to the question about policy and something Varian had raised, right? About, so what's acceptable as, I guess, official input to council. Anyways, it's just made me curious.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. You mean council isn't all following my Facebook page? Oh,
Maureen, I don't want to make for more work for us, but there is a little tiny disclaimer that heads the section on comments. Do you think it should ask people or could ask people to introduce themselves when posting a comment? I mean, they may choose not to, but we could prompt for it in that text.
We could prompt for it, but I think there's another level of question here as well. When we talk about correspondence being added to the council agenda, we say we want to know who it's from. But while we use this YouTube comment box now because we are virtual in deference to the pandemic safety guidelines, really anybody could come in to watch a council meeting and stand
But
up and
usually
say,
we do
"Election."
ask the same thing of people in person is, could
Yeah.
you introduce yourself and give us your comments? So
Well, maybe when we open the meeting and we welcome the people who are at home on YouTube and suggest to them that there will be that 10-minute period at the end when they'll be able to ask questions, add the proviso that we would ask them to identify themselves.
Well, as the CAO noted, we have a little blurb at the top of the comments box just to tell people that questions posted by the gallery will be answered in the 10 minutes allotted at the end of the council meeting. Council will respond to questions only, not comments. Questions must be clear, concise, and related to the meeting agenda. So that
Okay.
is, Dylan's probably right about the best way to do that. And
Put it in there.
welcome to what Dylan and I do the day after a council meeting, when we usually hash this stuff out and say, how would we approach that? So it's
Okay.
kind of our thought process.
All right. Is that the end of the question, Clerk? Okay. Well, thank you to the people who have chosen to join us on YouTube tonight and have stayed through until the end of the discussion. And we appreciate your support to watch. And we are now going to entertain a motion to go in camera. And when that happens, the feed to YouTube will be removed. And then we will have a closed session to discuss under MGA 22.2A and 22.2E. So, motion to go in camera from the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Do we have a seconder from Councillor Now? All in favor? We're going to go in camera. Let's take 5 minutes while everything gets shut